In the papers, Dad. It's the smart move. Derek and I have already talked to an attorney. My daughter said that to me on a Tuesday afternoon, standing in my own kitchen, holding a cup of coffee she'd made from my beans in my machine. She said it the way you'd tell someone to switch their phone plan, like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. Like I was nothing. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her for a long moment, then walked to the window and watched the oak tree in the backyard sway in the October wind. That oak tree was 43 years old. I know because I planted it the spring my wife, Loretta, found out she was pregnant with our daughter, Megan. I thought about that oak tree for a long time after Megan left that afternoon. I thought about what it had seen. Let me back up. My name is Walt, but everyone who knows me calls me by my last name, Cruz. My father called me Cruz. Loretta called me Cruz when she was teasing me, and Walt when she was serious. I retired at 62 after 31 years as a structural engineer with the county. We weren't rich, but we built something real. Loretta and I bought our house in Kennesaw, Georgia in 1987 for $114,000. 3 bedrooms, a half-acre lot, the oak tree I mentioned, and a garage I spent 20 years turning into a proper workshop. By the time Loretta got sick, that house was worth just over $1.8 million. Loretta was diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's in 2019. She was 61. I know people think of Parkinson's as an old man's disease, shaking hands, a shuffling walk. But what they don't tell you is what it does in the middle stages, the freezing episodes, where her body just locked up mid-step and she couldn't move. The falls. The medication adjustments that felt like science experiments. The nights I slept in the recliner next to the bed because I was afraid she'd try to get up and I wouldn't hear her. Megan lived 40 minutes away in Marietta. She and her husband Derek had a nice house, 2 cars, and as Derek reminded me almost every time I saw him, a very demanding work schedule. Derek worked in commercial real estate. He had opinions about everything and expertise in nothing, which I found to be a common combination in men his age. When Loretta first got her diagnosis, Megan cried on the phone for 20 minutes. She said she'd come by every week. She said we were family, and family showed up. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. The first year wasn't too bad. Megan came by on Sundays sometimes. She'd sit with her mother, watch a movie, help me with grocery runs. It felt like we were doing it together. Then Derek got a promotion. Then they started talking about renovating their kitchen. Then Sundays became every other Sunday, then once a month, then holidays and birthdays if we were lucky. I never said anything. That's not my nature. I was raised by a man who believed you handled your own weight, and you didn't make a fuss about it. But I noticed every time I called Megan to tell her that her mother had a bad fall, and she said, "Oh God, is she okay? Derek and I have a thing tonight, but I can text you the number for that home health agency." I noticed when Loretta asked me during one of her clearer moments, "Is Megan coming this weekend?" And I had to say something that wasn't quite a lie, but wasn't the truth either. I noticed when I drove Loretta to her neurology appointments alone, 45 minutes each way, while Megan sent flowers on Mother's Day with a card that said, "You are so loved. You are so loved." Loretta kept that card on her nightstand. She kept all of Megan's cards. I didn't. By 2022, I was effectively a full-time caregiver. Loretta needed help with bathing, dressing, managing her medications. I learned things I never thought I'd need to know. How to pivot transfer someone from a wheelchair without wrenching your back. How to thicken liquids to prevent choking. How to speak calmly when your wife looks at you and can't find your name in the file drawer of her mind. That one I wasn't prepared for. It happened on a Thursday in March. She looked at me, really looked at me, and her eyes went searching. I could see it. Like she was flipping through pages and couldn't find the right one. She finally said, "You're the man who takes care of me. Not Walt, not Cruz, just the man who takes care of her." I went to the garage that night and sat in my workshop for 2 hours. I didn't build anything, I just sat. I called Megan the next morning. I told her what had happened. There was a pause on the line. "Derek thinks we should start looking into memory care facilities," she said. "He did some research. There are some really good ones in Cherokee County." I said, "Your mother knows where she is. She knows who you are. She's having hard days, Megan. She's not gone." "I know, Dad, but Derek says at some point it becomes a liability issue. If she falls and you're not there." "I'm always there," I said. She didn't have much to say to that. What I didn't tell Megan was that I'd already been to an attorney. Not about Loretta. About the house. See, I'd been watching Derek for a while. The way he'd casually mention property values at Thanksgiving. The way he'd walk through the house with his eyes going to the ceilings, the square footage, the lot. He'd made a comment once. I think he thought I couldn't hear him. Telling Megan that the smart play would be to get on the deed before the medical bills eat everything. He said it in the kitchen while I was in the hallway. Loretta was asleep down the hall. I finished walking to the refrigerator, got myself a glass of water, and went back to the living room. I didn't say a word, but I listened from then on. Over the next few months, I learned that Derek had a plan. The plan involved convincing me that I needed help managing my finances, which was true in the sense that Loretta's care was expensive, and then using that as leverage to get Megan added to the property deed. From there, Derek had apparently explained to my daughter they could protect the asset from Medicaid spend down if the need ever arose. He wasn't entirely wrong about the Medicaid piece. That part was actually real. But Derek's version of protecting the asset had a very Derek-shaped destination, and it didn't involve me living in my home until I chose otherwise. I found this out because my neighbor Phil, a retired insurance adjuster who has never in his life minded his own business, God bless him, heard Derek on the phone in my driveway one Sunday while I was inside with Loretta. Phil doesn't miss a thing. He came over the next day under the pretense of returning a socket wrench he'd borrowed, and he told me, word for word, what he'd heard. Phil said, "Derek told whoever was on the phone, once we're on the deed, we can start making the argument that the property is a shared asset. If the old man ever needs Medicaid, we've got a 5-year look back, so we move fast. The house is worth at least 1.8 now. We can't let that just evaporate into a nursing home." The old man. I thanked Phil for the socket wrench. I went inside and made Loretta her afternoon medication. I changed the sheets on our bed. I made chicken soup from scratch because it was the one thing she could still taste properly, and it made her happy. And then I called my attorney. His name is a name I'll keep private, but I'll tell you he's been practicing estate law in Cobb County for 30 years, and he grew up in the same kind of house I did, and he does not suffer fools or manipulative sons-in-law. Over the course of the next several months, while I continued to care for Loretta and continued to welcome Megan and Derek into my home on the rare occasions they deigned to visit, I restructured everything. The house went into an irrevocable trust, not a revocable trust, which can be amended, an irrevocable one, meaning once it was done, it was done. The beneficiary of the trust was not Megan, it was the Parkinson's Foundation of Georgia, with a specific endowment designated for caregiver support programs, practical help for people like me, spouses doing the invisible work nobody sees. I also opened a dedicated account for Loretta's ongoing care, funded from our retirement savings, with a successor trustee who was not my daughter. I named Phil. Phil, the retired insurance adjuster who minds everyone's business. I figured if anyone was going to keep Derek's hands off things, it was a man who'd spent 40 years reading the fine print. I did not tell Megan any of this. Loretta passed in April of last year. It was a Thursday, just after sunrise. She'd had a rough night, and then, sometime around 5 in the morning, she just got quiet. I was holding her hand. I'd been holding her hand for most of the night. The hospice nurse was there. The room was still. When it was over, I sat with her for a while before I called anyone. I wanted those last few minutes to be just ours. I called Megan at 6:15. She arrived 3 hours later. Derek was with her. The first thing he did was ask where I kept the title paperwork for the house, because he wanted to make sure everything was organized. I told him it was being handled by my attorney. He said, right, of course, but we'll need access to those documents soon. I said, I know. That was all. The funeral was the following Wednesday. Loretta had told me years earlier exactly what she wanted. Nothing fancy, her favorite hymns, the people who actually loved her. About 60 people came. Megan gave a eulogy. It was genuinely beautiful, and I could tell she meant it. Grief is a strange thing. It can make real what distance had made abstract. I gave my daughter grace for that. 2 weeks after the funeral, Megan and Derek sat me down at my kitchen table. Derek had a folder. He put it on the table like he was presenting a business proposal, which I suppose he was. He explained that they'd been talking to a real estate attorney, a different one, not mine, and they believed the most financially responsible course of action would be to sell the house, given current market conditions, and use the proceeds to fund my retirement. He had comps. He had a projected sale price. He had a timeline. Derek thinks the market is going to soften next year, Megan said. I looked at my daughter. I looked at the folder. I thought about the Thursday nights I spent alone in the hospital parking lot, because visiting hours were over, but I wasn't ready to drive home yet. I thought about the way her mother said the man who takes care of me, and how I'd decided that was enough. I thought about a 43-year-old oak tree in my backyard. I said, I appreciate you putting this together. Derek looked satisfied. I said, but the house isn't mine to sell. The look on his face. I will carry that with me. What do you mean? Megan asked. The house is in a trust. Has been for over a year. My attorney can send you the documentation if you'd like to review it. Derek's jaw moved, but no sound came out for a moment. Then, what kind of trust? Irrevocable. You can't just. He stopped, started again. Who's the beneficiary? The Parkinson's Foundation of Georgia. There's an endowment specifically for spousal caregiver support. Your mother spent the last years of her life being cared for by someone who had no support system of his own. I figured other families shouldn't have to do this alone. The kitchen was very quiet. Megan said, Dad, the endowment is named after your mother, I said. The Loretta Cruz Caregiver Fund. It went into effect 6 months ago. The foundation has already started allocating it. Derek stood up. I honestly thought for a moment he was going to say something he couldn't take back, and part of me was curious what that would be. But he just picked up his folder and walked to the back door and stood there with his hand on the frame, looking out at the yard. Megan was crying. Quietly, not dramatically. The kind of crying that means something real is happening. I didn't know, she said. I didn't know you were. I know you didn't, I said. That's something you're going to have to sit with. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't trying to punish my daughter. Megan made choices and I made choices, and now we both had to live inside them. The trust wasn't revenge. The trust was a door I closed before someone else could walk through it uninvited. The Parkinson's Foundation sent me a letter in November. They'd used the first allocation from Loretta's fund to provide 3 months of in-home respite care for 11 caregiving spouses in the Atlanta metro area. 11 people who got to sleep through a night. 11 people who got to take a walk alone or sit in a waiting room without worrying. I read the letter in my workshop, the one Derek had once looked at with those commercial real estate eyes, and I thought, good. The house is mine to live in until I choose otherwise. That's written into the trust. When I'm gone or when I decide to leave, it passes to the foundation for liquidation and endowment. Derek will never own a square foot of it. I sleep fine about that. What I don't sleep as well about is Megan. She called me in December. Derek had apparently told her some version of events that positioned him as the reasonable one who had simply been trying to help, and for a few weeks she believed that. Then she called her cousin, Loretta's niece Beverly, who had been at my house enough times to know the shape of things. Beverly told her the truth. Megan called me on a Sunday evening, December 19th. She said, "Beverly told me Derek was on the phone in your driveway talking about Medicaid look-back periods, while Mum was inside." I said, "Yes." She was quiet for a long time. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Because I wasn't sure what version of you I was talking to," I said. "The one I raised, or the one Derek was talking to?" That was harder than I intended it, but it was true. She asked if she could come over. I said yes. She came the following Saturday, alone. We sat in the kitchen, same table, no folder. She brought a cough cake from the bakery Loretta used to love. We talked for almost 4 hours. About her mother. About the years she hadn't been present. About how she'd told herself the story that Derek was practical and she was being realistic, and that I was capable of handling things, and how all of those things had been a way of not having to feel bad about being absent. She cried again, differently this time. I told her about some of the hard moments. Not to wound her, she was already wounded, but because I thought she deserved the truth of what those years had actually looked like inside this house. I told her about the night her mother got up at 2 a.m. and made it all the way to the front door before I woke up. I told her about the afternoon I sat in the garage for 2 hours because I didn't know what else to do with what I felt. I told her about the moment her mother called me, the man who takes care of me, and how I'd decided to take that as a kind of gift. Megan put her hand over her mouth. "I should have been here," she said. "Yes," I said. "You should have." That's the whole truth of it, and I think she knew I wasn't saying it to hurt her. I was saying it because pretending otherwise would have been an insult to both of us. She's been coming by more regularly since then. Every other week, usually. Sometimes she calls just to talk. Derek comes occasionally, much quieter than before, with less to say about real estate values. I don't trust him, and I don't pretend to. But I watch my daughter. I watch her sit in the chair where Loretta used to sit, and talk to me the way she used to when she was younger, before Derek and before distance, and before it all got complicated. Grief does something to people, if they let it. It either makes them smaller, or it opens something up. I see Megan choosing to let it open something up. I don't know if she'll stay the course. But she's choosing it right now, and I think that's worth something. The Loretta Cruz Caregiver Fund, as of last month, has supported over 40 families in the Atlanta metro area. The foundation told me they expect to reach 100 before the end of the year. I think about those 40 families sometimes when I'm in the workshop, shaping something with my hands, listening to the quiet of a house that's still mine. Loretta would have loved knowing her name was doing something useful in the world. She was never interested in being remembered as an idea. She wanted to be useful. She wanted to show up. Some of us learn that lesson early. Some of us learn it late. Some of us have to lose something before we understand what showing up actually costs the people who never stopped doing it. I planted that oak tree 43 years ago because Loretta asked me to. She wanted something that would outlast us, she said. Something that would still be standing when we were gone. She was right, as usual. It's still standing. I keep thinking about that folder Derek put on my kitchen table. The neat edges of it. The way he set it down like it meant something. Like paper and comps and projected timelines were a language I didn't speak. He was wrong about that. I've been reading documents my whole career. I know exactly what a plan looks like when someone's already decided the outcome before the conversation starts. What I've come to understand, not just from this but from 60-some years of watching people make choices and then live inside them, is that what we do when nobody's looking is the whole story. Derek wasn't a bad man who appeared one day out of nowhere. He was a man who'd been making small calculations for years, and each one made the next one easier. That's how it works. You cut one corner, and the next corner is a little less sharp. You tell yourself one comfortable story, and the next one rolls off the tongue faster. By the time he was standing in my driveway talking about Medicaid look-back periods while my wife was dying 40 feet away, I don't think he even heard how it sounded. That's not evil. That's what happens when you stop asking yourself whether what you're doing is right, and start asking only whether it's legal. I don't say that to let him off the hook. I say it because I think it's true, and the truth is more useful than the simple version. Loretta used to say that character isn't what you claim, it's what you do when something costs you. She meant it about herself. She was hard on herself that way. But I've thought about it a lot in relation to Megan. My daughter isn't a cruel person. She's a person who let comfort become a habit and called it practicality. She let Derek's voice get louder than her own instincts, and she told herself the story that I was capable and fine and didn't need her, because that story cost her nothing. It let her keep the kitchen renovation and the demanding work schedule, and the idea that she was still a good daughter. The reckoning came anyway. It always does, not as punishment, but as consequence. The world doesn't balance the books to make a point. It just keeps accurate records. What I hope she takes from this, what I think she's starting to take from it, based on those long Saturday conversations over coffee cake, is that the intelligence to see a situation clearly is only worth something if you have the honesty to look at it straight. She's smart. She always was, but smart without honest is just a faster way to rationalize. What she's building now, slowly, in these bi-weekly visits and phone calls that aren't about anything urgent, is something harder to develop than intelligence. It's the willingness to sit with the discomfort of who she was and decide to be different. That takes more than brains. It takes a kind of quiet toughness most people avoid their whole lives because it requires admitting something first. I'm not a perfect man, and I wasn't a perfect father. I worked too much when she was young. I wasn't always good at saying what I felt directly. I handled things alone when I should have asked for help. So I'm not standing here with a clean ledger, but I made a decision in 2022 to do the right thing regardless of what it cost me in terms of conflict or discomfort or family peace. I restructured that trust. I protected Loretta's legacy. I did it quietly, without drama, and I waited. That waiting was its own kind of work. It required me to keep showing up with decency toward people who were not showing up with decency toward me. It required patience that didn't feel noble at the time. It just felt like grinding, but I think that's what decency actually looks like from the inside, not heroic, just steady. The Loretta Cruz Caregiver Fund is real and it's doing something real. 40 families. More coming. That's not an abstraction. That's 40 people who got to sleep, or breathe, or take a walk alone. Loretta would have found that deeply satisfying, and knowing that makes it satisfying for me too. I still sit in the workshop some evenings. The oak tree is visible from the window. I planted it because she asked me to. Because she wanted something that would outlast us. Turns out she was the thing that outlasted us. That's enough.